Very good morning to you. Welcome.
Morning.
So I see that you've been getting your TV aerial removed from your roof. I mean, it's quite an interesting piece in the paper today. You say, putting down my TV aerial has made me realise how much television once shaped my life. Amazing, isn't it, how little it now does?
Well, yes, and I'm glad to see the back of it. When I think of all the garbage which I absorbed, mouth hanging open as a child, and how much better I could have spent the time, it still shocks me. I still think we'd all be better people if television had never been invented. But here we are. Right. It's been, and it's now gone. It's now dissolved into a thousand other screens and forms of transmission, and the great power that it had in my childhood and just about into my teens, when millions and millions of people would watch the same program on one night, has just disappeared.
Yeah, and it was a social kind of thing, wasn't it? I mean, on Saturday nights in my house, when I was a kid, you know, we all sat down and watched TV probably from about sort of 6 o'clock until Match of the Day finished.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. We did that, and as I say, I think it wasn't good for us. But now that it's over, I think what we have instead is not necessarily any better. A shattered, disparate, all over the place electronic world, where people are more or less watching what they want to, means that there's really no common feeling or understanding of the world between lots and lots of people. They just live in separate worlds, which is no better. But I still think print and books and newspapers were better than the electronic world, which drove them out, and whatever will replace what we have now may well be worse than what we have now.
Well, I wonder whether what we have now is so, as you say, disparate, that you can take any truth that you want and turn it into the real truth because you've become convinced that somebody told you something that you liked, and therefore it must be right.
Certainly that's the impression we all get, isn't it? That people are believing what they want to believe. And I think we've recently had evidence of that.
Well, I mean, I was going to ask you, you know, the last sort of 10 days has been a ghastly period to be living in Britain. I've felt that we've never been more disunited than this. I mean, like you, I've lived through, you know, the big 3-day weeks, the miners' strikes, the Falklands War, you know, the riots of 2011, the Brixton riots, you know, all the Scarman inquiry, the Scarman report. I mean, it's as bad now, I think, as it's ever been, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned those things. Did you ever read the Scarman report?
I did.
Because I read it because when I wrote my big book about crime and justice and disorder back in the early part of the century, I actually read the Scarman report, and I was astonished by how false the impression that we all got from it was. It's again and again and again, there is disorder in the streets of one kind or another. And one political faction or another then decides to claim that this disorder in some way makes their point. So the people who wanted to change the nature of policing towards the end of the 20th century very much used the Brixton events to try and argue for this, claiming that there was some sort of spontaneous uprising of public feeling. Right. Again, in the 2011 so-called riots, which in my view were nothing more than an outbreak of naked criminality with no political significance whatsoever. It's extraordinary, isn't it, that the people get so angry and discontented, the first thing they go and do is raid an electronics shop.
Right, and take home a television.
This is not, it's thievery and violence. There's self-indulgence, a lot of violence, particularly drunken or drug violence is just self-indulgence and no more. Then people try to give it political significance, and I think something quite similar may have been happening in the past few days as well. Looking at the pathetic people shuffling in and out of the dock over the past couple of days, you do not get the impression that you're here dealing with a political movement of thoughtful people saying, I don't like the way the country is run. No. It doesn't give me that impression anyway.
No.
But what it also says, and this is fascinating, is here you have a Labour government saying, we will be tough. So what do? Faced with disorder on the streets, they put plenty of police officers on the streets to deter and discourage it. They arrest people. When they arrest them, they charge them. Having charged them, they then try them. And when they try them, when they're found guilty, they then punish them. This is the basic order of criminal justice, but it's one which most of the political left, and indeed the political so-called right, have for the past 50 years in this country been trying to avoid. Right. The last thing they've wanted to do. And it's demonstrated again and again and again. If you want to get control of the streets. And if you want to discourage wrongdoing, then you have to apply criminal justice through a visible police force and effective courts. And we've shown, I think, anybody looking at how it's been dealt with over the past few days has to give credit to the swiftness and determined nature of the response. And it appears, fingers crossed, that's over now. And just goes to show, doesn't it, that the enforcement of law will work if it's done. But it's people someone who, let's say, for instance, a theoretical example, set fire to a car on a wretched housing estate a week ago, before all this started, nothing would happen to him.
No.
He does it during these events, he might well end up in prison. Well, frankly, he should have ended up in prison.
Yes.
When he did it outside so-called riots. But the truth is that we've given up most of the time enforcing the law. As soon as we do enforce the law, people notice and start behaving differently. I think that's one of the biggest lessons we can learn from the last few days.
Yeah, I
if
think
anybody will learn them.
Well, it would be nice if they would learn something. But the
it would be, wouldn't it?
It's
also
so
obvious when you think about it.
It's also, though, is it not, giving people the opportunity, and they're making noises like this already, that the electronic landscape that you referred to earlier might become a much more tricky place to navigate, because it looks to me as though Keir Starmer and certainly the Metropolitan Police Commissioner would like to make it more difficult for you to have an opinion that they don't agree with.
Well, probably. I mean, it's the habit of the political left to be crabby about freedom of speech in any case. So one of the first actions of this new government was to dismantle the only attempt by the last Conservative government to defend free speech in universities. So we can't really rely on them to be so. But I'm not sure on this issue we can build very much out of that. The other thing is that there are a number of things which people are saying this week, which everybody has known. I've known and have been saying for decades now. But obviously our police have become heavily politicized, and that their leadership is largely politically correct. Well, who didn't know that? But it hasn't actually been the main issue of the past few days. I mean, I don't in any way withdraw from my criticisms of a lot of what's been wrong with the police, but it hasn't made any difference to the point I just made, which is that if you want to deter criminal behaviour, then you police effectively, you're present, and the people are then prosecuted effectively.
Although one of the things that has come up in the last few days, because of the police themselves saying it, is that it's very clear they don't police everything in the same way, and there is a kind of two-tier aspect to certain communities that they go to and say, what do you think? Would you like us to come and police you? And they get told, no, thanks very much, we'll do it ourselves. And a lot of people find that quite extraordinary.
Well, it's not. Again, as I say, it is an effect of the fact that the police now serve a very different, masters from the one they served until about 40 years ago, when they used to be the servants of the public. They became the servants of the government. They became more political. I think police have always altered their reactions to events under circumstances, as everybody does. I think the phrase two-tier policing doesn't actually clarify what's going on here. It doesn't. It's a slogan. It doesn't help. If you want a police force which is actually fundamentally based on upholding the law and defending the citizens of this country, as opposed to being the organ of the state, which it's become, then you need huge and radical police reform of the kind which I've been suggesting for many years. But to try and make it into a sort of basic, this is two-tier policing because the police have been tough on some people who've behaved badly, I don't find myself happy to join in with that, I'm afraid. It doesn't work for me. On an occasion when I see the police taking on disorder in the streets, and I hate disorder in the streets, anybody who's seen it knows that it's something which needs to be stopped. If the police actually do take on disorder in the streets and stop it, then I will back them in that. And I think that it's my duty as a citizen to do so, whatever my political reservations.
As long as they do it fairly. But equally, the other problem I think we've got is that Keir Starmer said he wants to make the streets safer in Britain, as if they've only just become unsafe. The fact is they've been unsafe for a very long time, and a lot of people,
and indeed largely thanks to the politics of people like him. Yes, quite so. I agree with that. But again, that doesn't. You can't let that undermine your support for effective police action where it does take place. And I think that's where you have to be careful.
Yes. No, I accept that. I think that's true. Peter, I know you've got to rush, so I'm going to let you go. But thank you very much indeed. As ever, fascinating stuff from Peter Hitchins, his column in the Mail on Sunday about television and how ridiculous it has now become. And I say that as somebody who's on television. And I know that you might say you're not on television in the same way that the ITV are on television, but we are still on television. We are watched now by so many people on connected devices, on, you know, smart TVs, that it might as well be part of the same network as ITV, because, of course, they are the people who think it's a good idea for the Home Secretary to be interviewed by her husband. That's Ed Balls and that's Yvette Cooper.